accordion 6, number 3. We're very pleased to have with us today Professor Sung from the University of Minnesota, anthropology professor, as well as Asian American Studies and American Studies professor. Many people have contributed to bringing Professor Sung here today. First of all, Naomi Genowitz, Professor Naomi Genowitz, who is really...
Personally put in a lot of money. You said the way you said it, you made it sound like that personally.
She had to sell her car.
Yes. Might go.
And I also want to thank Ishani for bringing Professor Sung here and helping out with that. UC Berkeley also contributed to this, as well as a number of programs on campus, like humanities, religion, Latin American studies. We are also very happy that Alan moved things around so we could all be here today. So thank you. We're really excited for this talk. Professor Sung has written a book about self-reflexivity and looking at relations, in his first book on pigeon troubles. And this talk is about a newer work that he's working on. We're going to hear about temporality, psychoanalysis, vitalism, and a great deal more. If you haven't received a paper for some reason, even though we've sent it out to various listservs, go ahead and just ask me, give me your email address, and I can get you that paper today. In terms of the rest of the year, we've had a bunch of exciting talks so far. We have some more exciting talks as well. Dr. Jan de Vos on May 7th, Dr. Laurel Recker on May 8th, and Dr. Jeff Prager on May 22nd, all coming up, and all are going to be really interesting and exciting presentations. So please do come to all of this. Mr. Song?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt, for organizing, and thank you, Ishani, for inviting me. And thank you for all those of you who took the sacrifice, automobile. I'm especially grateful for your risking precious resources and time slot for a scholar of a doubtful repute. It's really great and honored to be here. The paper that I'm going to present today is ongoing work, preliminary report. The paper is mainly will be about methodology, as I call it. It's a developing about a bit, basically. This particular version that I'm going to present today is greatly benefited from the breakfast that I had with Ishani this morning. So you will see the trace of her thinking here. The paper is about North Korea. This was a problem that I immediately detected when I began the project in North Korea, which is the sheer poverty of understanding what North Koreans are talking about. And so I thought about it somewhat, and then I came to the conclusion that whether it is a theory, political theory, philosophical theory, or journalism, there's something underlying assumption in reading North Korean material. And the underlying assumption is so-called representative power. Representative power is the only legitimate form of power. Representative power in liberal democracy is understood as a certain relation between one and multitude. To quote Strathern's phrase, the problem here is the assumption that alternative one is many, that either or logic is a problem in the assumption of representative power. I tap into multirealism, so-called multirealism, particularly of Vivesh de Castro and Strathern. In order to tap into their vigorous critique of representationalism. Representationalism is a philosophical wing, shall we say, of the idea of a representative power. In their vigorous critique of representationalism, what is criticized by multi-realists such as Bergson or Strathern is the idea of context. Context or the idea of the global. I will unpack what those mean later. And instead, someone like Bergson will bring in Nietzsche's concept of a perspectivism in order to deconstruct the idea of context. The context that has been presupposed in order for you to think about one and multitude relation. Context that is presupposed as a kind of framework within which one and multitude can be calculated, shall we say. Multirealism's contribution, I think, is to disrupt that idea of context. The context is what I call in my abstract multicultural consensus. So in that consensus, I also read context, which is such a crucial concept for anthropology. A bit of a disclaimer here. My presentation will sound too theoretically abstract and confusing also. Confusing because Marxism, my discussion of Marxism, appears twice. Marxism appears as a North Korean's cosmology, to use a multi-realist word. Marxism as North Korea's cosmology, and Marxism as a theoretical framework with which I try to understand North Korean philosophy. This will sound inevitably too theoretical, because what I'm trying to do here is, shall we say, an imminent critique of Marxism according to North Koreans. In other words, taking seriously the claim that North Koreans claim that North Korean philosophy is the only legitimate successor to Marxism. I want to unpack that claim. So that is what I mean by North Korean cosmology. And I'm also using Marxism as a theoretical framework, a tool, shall we say, to learn to see the world like North Koreans. Especially, I want to unpack the concept of life. Because the North Korean philosophy, history, the philosophy history that is contained in North Korean political philosophy and political education leads to one partaking in quasi-biological concept of life, which one shares with a leader. So I want to just put it out there so that you can anticipate it. In other words, in this disclaimer, what I'm trying to achieve is the fact that I'm not using Marxism as a meta theory. I'm not interested in that. Rather, I'm using Marxism or any kind of theory that I talk about as a gesture of power, particularly magic. I want to talk about theory as a magical practice. So I will end with a very disappointing conclusion because of a reason. According to academic standards, the talk will end without satisfying resolution because of a reason. Okay. Another context that I'm thinking about, other than multirealism and immanent critique, another context that I'm thinking about is a more general theme of a study of power, which is ubiquitous nowadays, thanks to Foucault, I think. My general dissatisfaction with ubiquitous studies of power is the assumption that the researcher who is studying power is not caught by that power. I think that is very, very important. So that's another context I'm considering. Let me begin with an episode, an anecdote of some sort. The South Korean anthropologist by the name of Hoon of Seoul National University. There are a couple of her publications. She talks about a certain odd thing that emerged during the process of interviewing North Korean defectors who now reside in South Korea. And she mentions this as a footnote in passing, without making any generalizations. And the odd thing that emerged during her interview with the North Korean defectors was this. A couple of times, some of the defectors who in their childhood participated in this famous mass game that the North Korean kids and adults put together for the leader, talked about how when you walk in front of the leader, a white light completely makes you blind. So this was talked about almost in this precise manner a couple of times. And so she just mentions that as a funny thing. It's a funny thing that they say that because of the fact that because of their status as a defector, of course they will denounce North Korean regime readily. But at the same time, they will readily also at the same time talk about their enduring love for the leader. Love, that's my word. Enduring love for the leader. So this remainder is something that is very puzzling to her. And she also mentions the fact that when she pointed out that contradiction to the informants, they were puzzled. They were puzzled as to why that can be perceived as contradiction to anyone. So she mentions that in the footnote. Over the winter break, I visited Korea, and then I met her. I sought her out, and so I asked about this precise point when she this precise context of the interview where she discovered that, and she revealed something really intriguing to me. She reported this fact. She said, the fact that they talked about enduring love for the leader, and the fact that they experienced something like white light completely blinding them, she reports to me the fact that she didn't hear that during the time of the interview. She didn't hear that at all. Only retrospectively, when she went back to the audio tapes and her field notes, she realized that they said it. And she heard it a couple of times, but she didn't hear it. That's one thing. But moreover, she was astounded to hear her own speech changing to accommodate that fact. She accommodated that fact by switching to language that was very vague, such as instead of calling Kim Jong-il, which was then leader, who passed away December last year. Was it last year? 2 years ago. I'm losing the count. 2 years ago. So in the context where she could perfectly refer to Kim Jong-il as by his name, she will use the words such as "kubun." "Kubun" in Korea is extremely vague. It could be anyone. So she heard herself using that kind of vague word, as if she's participating in that mystification, as if she's talking about the same kind of amazing, fascinating phenomenon that the leader is. So she was astounded to hear that, she said. So we can be cynical about that. We may conjecture that, yes, of course, if you're in the field and you're interviewing informants, maybe you want to strategically participate in the language of belief, the language of the believers, to elicit fascinating material, shall we say. Perhaps we do that opportunistically, without calculation maybe. As an ethnographer, the profession of ethnographer calls for something like that. And skeptical reading. But I think what is important here is the fact that she did not remember doing that. I think if it was some kind of calculation like that, I think she would have remembered it. But I think the fact that she was astounded to hear herself saying that in audio tape is a significant fact. So, the question that I'm asking in this paper is this. What is it in the leader that an unbelieving ethnographer, reasonably, despite herself, finds herself inhabiting the voice of the believer? Is a question that I want to return again and again. For that, let me turn to this book. This book, I think, is emerging once again, emerging as a very refreshing perspective on power. When we are living in the age where power is talked about by researchers, as if researcher him or herself is not caught by the thrall of power when studying. In that time, in that era, this book is emerging once again as a very inspiring, because Barbara Sadat's methodology, she explicitly calls her methodology is by deliberately making herself caught by power, is a key word for her. Her methodology is to make herself being caught by power. She calls it language of power. Exposing herself to language of power, in contrast to language of information. Of course, being caught also means catching other people with that language. Just like Hyungjin, Barbara Sadat also reports in a very similar fashion how she was shocked when she went back to her audio tape of sessions where she was talking with the believers of witchcraft. She was shocked to hear herself using vague language that the believers use. The example that she highlights is the word someone. When she could perfectly name the person specifically, she'd hear herself using someone. We can call that language, vague language among the witchcraft believers, something like homonymic amphibology. Homonymic amphibology is required in witchcraft belief because of the stigma. So necessarily, the witchcraft believers in the Bokaj use a vague language so that it can pass as a language of a mainstream society. But if the believer of a witchcraft listens to it, it can be also interpreted as a language of witchcraft. So she heard herself, Barbara Sadat heard herself in the audio tape, speaking that language. She calls her methodology with these words. I'm quoting. Her methodology is to make explicit what ethnographer finds unstateable in oneself, unquote. She calls it amnesia. Another phrase is something vague, a vague perception that something in this cannot be coped with, unquote. So what does she mean by amnesia? By amnesia, she means precisely what I described from Hyang Jin's experience. And the ethnographers inhabiting the voice of the believer despite herself and not remembering it, amnesia in that sense. The anthropologist who is a supposedly unbeliever, believing as if you're believing on your stead beside yourself. You're inhabiting the voice of nobody, shall we say. Nobody particular. Her method is not empathy. Her method is not the feigning of a putting oneself in the shoes of the believers and looking at the world as if they see themselves. Her methodology is rather somewhere between her own skepticism and the believer. It's the realm of nobody. I can summarize her point like this. For her, to be among the society of believers means not to empathize with their worldview, but to take the interlocutor's belief, to take the interlocutors as what I will call inadequate sign that points to something beyond. We can call it possible world. That's Deleuze's phrase, possible world, that is signaled by something that is self-inadequating, inadequate. That I'll talk about later. It's a kind of inadequacy that immediately transitions into excessive meaning. I will just drop this for the psychoanalytically inclined audience, that this is what Lacan calls letter, something that is inadequate, that is immediate transitioning into something excessive. The letter conceals, but it conceals by showing something, for Lacan. In anthropology, we talk about similar things. Paradigmatic example of that is the gift. Gift in the sense that gift is a thing that announces its own conditioning of appearance. It announces the fact that it is a self-conditioning kind of thing, in the sense that it is not a thing that appears along the path that is already defined within the social context or relational context. But gift is something that demonstrates its own condition of possibility, its own appearance. It doesn't just appear, but it also shows its condition of appearance. That's a gift. And I think Lacan's idea of the letter is precisely that. Something that conceals by showing. But I'll elaborate on that concept later. That is being caught, or Barbara Sadat. Being caught is to perceive something in that fashion, something that is self-conditioning its own appearance. That is power for her. So I said, to be in the society of the believers for Barbara Sadat means to take your interlocutor's belief, to take your interlocutor as integument, shell, inadequate sign that, because of its inadequacy, paradoxically points to something beyond. In conclusion, Barbara Sadat calls the idea of the witch a narrative problem. When she calls that, she's not saying that you can somehow look at the witchcraft belief from the point of view of the global context. That's what social scientists usually posit. And then determine something like witchcraft belief as a case of illusion or error. Shall we say from the third person's point of view. When she calls the witch narrative prop, what she means, I think, is, to borrow Deleuze's phrase again, fourth person singular. So I'm contrasting here third person point of view, which facilitates what we call context. And I'm contrasting that to what Deleuze calls fourth person singular. If I elaborate the Deleuzean concept just a little bit, I don't want to go into it too much. Fourth person singular, that dimension for Deleuze is where we become worthy of what happens to us. He gives an example, suffering. For those of you who are inclined towards non-human beings, this is the level of pre-individual nobody for Deleuze, or sometimes he calls the other, pre-individual other. For Deleuze, in logical sense, he calls our ability to reside in this fourth person singular dimension becoming citizen of the world. For him, becoming citizen of the world hangs on our ability to reside in this dimension of the fourth that he talks about. So I think it's an interesting alternative to thinking about, interesting alternative to context, which posits a third person point of view. And I'll come back to it when I talk about theology later. So my ambition is capturing North Korea as part of such a world. For Hyungjin, if I translate this, what I just said, through Hyungjin's work, if Hyungjin were to approach this way, if Hyungjin were to share my ambition of capturing North Korea within the world that Deleuze is talking about, it would be something like this. Taking North Koreans' defectors' testimony as something that is other than that presupposes before and after. Being a defector, by definition, means you have an objective before and after. That's what the very nature of becoming a defector. The subject of defection necessarily has to presuppose that. That's the only kind of subject that the state recognizes. Just like a conversion, the subject of conversion, there's the before and after. However, if we were to think about subject of defection in the language of power, in terms of the language of power, in terms of appearance that is conditioning itself, we have to capture that kind of subject as the subject that is mobile in time. We have to think about that subject as a mobile instance of representing before and after. We have to capture the subject as a very in its very act of demarcating before and after. So, to recall the presentation of Bergson and Marx, which are announced in the title, I will talk about Bergson here. Bergson, because Bergson, I think, aids us in thinking about this fourth dimension that I just talked about. In other words, Bergson provides us means with which we can think about the world as something other than the global. Here, I want to take Peter and Paul as an allegory of South Korea and North Korea, allegory of the rest of the world versus North Korea. Like I said, my ambition is to capture North Korea as the world of a fourth dimension that the little talks about. Bergson's question is this. Around the passage that he talks about this, his question is this. Can we possibly think about single time without presupposing global context? Global. Can we think about single time without presupposing something like the global? The global we might capture from the third point of view. In other words, if I were to put it in the multirealist kind of language, I would say something like, can we possibly think about one world, single time, without presupposing unified coordinates of context that we might call it the globe? This particular discussion of Peter and Paul emerges around the passages where Bergson is disputing with Einstein's theory of relativity. His dispute with the theory of relativity can be seamlessly transported to our criticism of Recursion relativism. So Bergson challenges Einstein this way. Okay, you speak of a difference. You tell us that there are different times. You tell us that there are other times. Then what is it? His question is extremely simple. What is different time, other time? And he demonstrates the